It began like any ordinary evening, the kind where the neighborhood seemed to hum with routine. Lawn sprinklers ticked in the distance, porch lights blinked on one by one, and the faint smell of barbecue drifted from somewhere down the cul-de-sac. The kind of peace people moved into HOA neighborhoods for, the illusion of safety, order, and community. But illusions are fragile things. The first crack came as the last threads of daylight faded. A sharp knock rattled the front door, not the casual kind that neighbors used when dropping off mail or inviting someone over, but a heavy, deliberate pounding. It was a sound that didn't belong in a quiet, manicured subdivision. On the other side of that door stood two men in uniforms. Their crisp, dark outfits bore badges glinting under the porch light. At first glance, they seemed official, police officers perhaps, but something was off. Their stance was rigid, their eyes darting nervously instead of holding steady. One carried a clipboard, the other kept a hand hovering near his belt as if waiting for trouble. They introduced themselves as representatives of the HOA's Compliance Enforcement Team, a phrase that immediately triggered suspicion. Compliance officers weren't supposed to dress like armed police, and they weren't supposed to show up unannounced at dusk. The homeowner stood silently, taking them in. Years of training had conditioned him to observe the smallest tells. A mismatched patch stitched onto one of the uniforms. Shoes too worn for men supposedly on official duty. The smell of cigarette smoke clinging to one despite the HOA's reputation for strict no-smoking rules. Details most people would overlook, but to someone with a background in Homeland security, those details screamed danger. The clipboard was thrust forward, filled with supposed violations. Grass too long, trash bins visible from the street, a backyard shed painted the wrong shade. Petty infractions exaggerated into threats of fines. But these weren't simple citations. Every word dripped with intimidation, and then came the ultimatum. Either resolve the issues immediately, or face escalating action from the HOA, including further visits from officers like them. Their eyes lingered on the house a little too long, as if measuring it, memorizing its layout. Behind the front door, the homeowner's wife moved quietly, her expression uneasy as she glanced toward the living room where their children played. She whispered, asking if everything was okay, but the look on her husband's face said otherwise. The knock at dusk wasn't about grass or sheds. It was about control, and someone in the HOA had decided to send more than letters to get their way. After the so-called officers left, the street fell quiet again, but the peace was gone. Porch lights that once felt warm now cast long, eerie shadows. The family locked every door, every window, double-checking each latch. The air was heavy with unspoken fear. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the house sounded amplified, every passing car a threat. Questions circled endlessly. Who were those men really, and how far would the HOA go to enforce its will? By morning, an unsettling detail emerged. The security cameras captured the men arriving, but not in a patrol car. Instead, they stepped out of an unmarked sedan with no plates, no lights, no sirens, just a plain vehicle that belonged nowhere near law enforcement. It was the confirmation he needed. They weren't real officers. They weren't even trained security. They were imposters, sent deliberately to intimidate under the guise of authority. And if the HOA was bold enough to send fakes to the doorstep once, it wouldn't be the last time. The neighborhood no longer felt like home. It felt like enemy territory. Every neighbor's glance seemed loaded with suspicion. Every rule suddenly felt like a weapon waiting to be used. The line between order and tyranny had blurred, and the family was caught in the middle. The knock at dusk was just the beginning. The morning after the unsettling visit, the streets of the subdivision looked deceptively normal. Joggers passed with earbuds in, dogs barked from neatly trimmed yards, and sprinklers arced like clockwork across driveways. But beneath the neat facades, tension rippled unseen. The homeowner knew what he had witnessed wasn't routine enforcement. The HOA president, Richard Hayes, was an older man known for his rigid devotion to the association's rules. He carried himself with the air of a man who believed he alone kept the neighborhood from collapsing into chaos. His thin smile, sharp eyes, and clipped manner of speaking had always unsettled residents. But until now, his threats had lived in letters and meeting minutes. But now, things had escalated. That day, a new letter arrived. Unlike the standard printed notices with legal jargon, this one was handwritten, tucked into the mailbox without postage. The words were blunt, aggressive, and chilling. Last warning. Comply, or you'll regret it. No HOA used that kind of language. No HOA president signed with only initials. And yet, The handwriting betrayed a trembling hand, as if written by someone trying to mask their fear beneath their aggression. Inside the house, unease grew heavier. His wife's eyes lingered on the children as they played near the window, her movements sharper, protective. She double-checked locks, pulled curtains closed even during daylight. Every noise outside sent her glancing nervously toward the door. The homeowner couldn't ignore it any longer. His instincts sharpened, honed by years of reading threats and following trails others missed. If this HOA had gone rogue, sending imposters, escalating with threats, then it wasn't just about property lines or paint colors. Someone was testing limits, gauging how far they could push until resistance broke. That night the cameras caught something again. A figure lingered at the edge of the property, just beyond the glow of the porch light. The outline was unmistakable. A man standing still for minutes watching the house. He didn't move closer. He didn't knock. He simply stood there before slipping back into the shadows. The next day, the homeowner began his own quiet investigation. He checked public records, tracing the HOA's filings, their contractors, and their security budgets. Nothing explained the presence of men dressed like officers. The association had no registered security detail, no permits for enforcement, no contracts with local police, which left one conclusion. Someone within the HOA was manufacturing authority. Neighbors, too, began to whisper. An elderly couple down the street mentioned men knocking on their door late at night, claiming their mailbox was the wrong style. A young mother confided that someone left notes on her car threatening fines for parking in her own driveway. None of it had been formally documented. Everyone was too afraid to speak openly. The masks were slipping. The HOA wasn't protecting property values anymore. It was enforcing fear. And then came the second visit. This time the imposters arrived in broad daylight. Same uniforms, same false confidence, but this time they brought backup. 2 more men waited in the unmarked car, their faces partially obscured, scanning the street. They claimed there had been a complaint about disturbances coming from the house, though no such disturbance existed. Their tone was sharper, their stance more aggressive. The clipboard now carried not just citations, but a list of escalating fines, numbers designed to crush, not correct. The homeowner studied them carefully. Their gear wasn't standard issue. Their radios were outdated models, more like props than tools. The holsters on their belts were empty, a weak imitation of authority. They were actors in a dangerous play, trying to project power they didn't possess. Yet the danger wasn't diminished, because behind them stood someone pulling strings, someone who wanted control badly enough to risk exposure. That night, while the neighborhood quieted again, the homeowner reviewed the footage frame by frame. Every angle, every shadow, every detail became a piece of a puzzle. And then he noticed it. One of the imposters had a distinctive tattoo crawling up his wrist, partially hidden by the cuff of the uniform. A local gang symbol. This wasn't just HOA intimidation, it was infiltration. The association had opened its gates to outsiders, men with no ties to the neighborhood, no investment in its peace. They had been dressed, instructed, and unleashed. The masks had finally slipped. And if this was only the second visit, what came next would be far worse. The discovery of the tattoo changed everything. What once looked like neighborhood pettiness had revealed a darker truth. The HOA president had aligned himself with men who thrived on intimidation. These weren't volunteers, they weren't compliance officers, they were enforcers, men used to getting what they wanted through fear. For days, the homeowner's house felt like a fortress under siege. Cameras recorded every car that slowed in front of the driveway, every stranger walking a little too close to the property line. The family lived in a state of guarded silence, blinds drawn tight, routines disrupted. Even the children sensed the unease, their once carefree laughter replaced with quiet questions their parents struggled to answer. But fear, if left unchecked, only grows. And he wasn't a man who had built a career in Homeland security by folding under pressure. He knew predators thrived when their prey showed weakness. The time had come to set the trap. The plan was simple but precise. He informed no one, not even his wife, of the full scope. Only enough so she would be ready if things escalated. He knew they would return. Bullies always did when their threats went unanswered. And when they came, the house would no longer be the one under scrutiny. They would be. It was a humid evening when the knock came again. The same deliberate pounding that had once rattled the door now answered with calm precision. He opened slowly, revealing the 2 imposters from before, flanked this time by a third man whose eyes were colder, harder. They had shed any pretense of civility. They demanded immediate payment for fines, claiming this was the last opportunity before legal action. But their threats rang hollow, their confidence fraying at the edges. He could see it in the way their eyes flicked toward the security cameras now clearly visible on the porch. He could hear it in the slight hesitation in their voices. He let them speak, let them rattle off their rehearsed lines. All the while his phone streamed the encounter live to a secured channel, feeding directly to local authorities he had quietly contacted earlier that week. Their words, their threats, their fake uniforms, all captured in real time. Then he stepped forward, voice low but steady, the kind of tone that carried the weight of someone who had faced far worse adversaries. He didn't reveal his position, not yet. Instead, he pressed with questions only law enforcement would know how to answer. Badge numbers, department affiliations, case references. Each answer faltered, each lie tangled into the next until the men stood exposed, their masks shredded by their own ignorance. And then, for the first time, he spoke the truth they hadn't expected to hear, that he wasn't just a homeowner. He was a Homeland security agent, trained to dismantle threats far greater than fake officers at a suburban doorstep. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. One of the imposters shifted nervously, glancing toward the unmarked car idling at the curb. The third man's jaw tightened, his posture tense. The facade had collapsed, and in its place remained only desperation. Moments later, headlights cut through the street. Unmarked vehicles, real ones this time, rolled in quietly, coordinated with precision. Uniformed officers stepped out, their presence undeniable. The imposters froze, caught between running and surrender, but there was nowhere left to go. The standoff ended not with violence, but with handcuffs and evidence bags. The uniforms, the fake citations, the threats, all documented, all dismantled. And when the HOA president was finally confronted, the truth spilled out. His obsession with control had driven him to hire muscle, dressing them as officers to give weight to his threats. He hadn't expected anyone to question it. He hadn't anticipated resistance from someone who saw through facades for a living. The neighborhood exhaled in relief as word spread. Those who had endured silent threats and unspoken fear now understood they hadn't been alone. The illusion of order the HOA had clung to had been shattered, replaced with the hard truth of how close things had come to spiraling out of control. In the days that followed, the house once again filled with the ordinary sounds of life, children laughing, sprinklers ticking, neighbors greeting one another with cautious smiles. Yet something had changed. The homeowner knew peace was fragile, that safety was never a guarantee, but he also knew he had faced the shadows head-on and pulled the mask from those who sought to hide behind false authority. And as the sun set on that final night, the cul-de-sac quiet once more, the house at the end of the street no longer felt like enemy territory. It felt like home reclaimed.